Okay.
No, Lord Chair, I'll leave you to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. So, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our public governing body meeting, and we will make a start on the agenda if that's okay. Item 1 on the agenda is apologies. Just to say that our chairman, Dr. Richard Cullen, is not available today. So as vice chairman, I shall be chairing the meeting today. And we've also had apologies from Councillor Roach as well. Item 2 on quorum. We are quorate. We have got the requisite number of governing body members here today. So just to confirm that we're quorum. Item 3 is declarations of interest. I think we'll firstly just take the usual declaration of interest associated with our primary care providers. So that's the GPs that are part of the governing body. So we'll take the general declaration of interest in terms of their interest in the business of the clinical commissioning group. We also just need to refer to item 20, which is the minutes of the remuneration committee. And we will all, I think all of us will have an interest in that item. So we'll declare that general interest now, but I'll explain when we get to that item on the agenda how we'll manage that conflict of interest in terms of decision making. And then I'll just open it up for any other individual declarations of interest that anybody would like to make. I think we've actually lost Janet. Can I just wait till Janet rejoins us? Because I think in terms of item 7 on the agenda, there is reference to the contract with Voluntary Action Rotherham. Sorry, Janet, we lost you there for a moment, but we were just doing declarations of interest, and I was just, if you like, repeating the declaration of interest that you made yesterday, Audit Committee, in terms of item 7 today, the contract with Voluntary Action Rotherham, if that's okay.
Yeah, sorry, the internet went down. So,
yeah.
Yes, thank you, John.
Thank you. Item 4 is patient and public questions, and as far as I'm aware, we have no questions for today's agenda. Ruth, no, thank you.
No, nothing received, Chair.
Thank you. So we move on to item 5, which is the draft minutes of the last meeting which we held, which was actually on the 1st of September. Can we go through the agenda for matters of accuracy, please, first, page by page? Just shout out if you have got any comments as we go through. Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16 and 17. So I think everybody's content with those minutes, so we'll approve those as a true record. Hopefully any matters arising are covered on the action log in a moment, but if we could move to item 6 in terms of the action log. There are 2 items on there from our July meeting. Can I just check on that first one, which is around a discussion between Dr. Clitheroe and Dr. Da Costa. David, is there anything still outstanding in terms of that, or would you see that as complete now?
We haven't had a formal discussion, but I'm not sure whether it's in date at the moment, I suppose, is the question mark, really.
Okay. Shall we? I mean, I think that was just a discussion from the July meeting that was expected. Should we take that off the action log now? I think.
I would have thought so. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, we'll do that. The second one on the agenda in terms of the delivery dashboard and an action for Richard Cullen, in view of the fact that Richard's not here today, we'll leave that on the agenda as with the amber rating, if that's okay. Was there any other matters arising from the last set of minutes that have not emerged on the action log that anybody wanted to raise? Okay, thank you very much. So that takes us swiftly on to item 7, which is the Chief Officer's report. Chris, probably the biggest Chief Officer's report we've had for some time, with 11 items on there. Would you just like to take us through anything you want to raise specifically with us?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, what I'll do is I'll just do the highlights, if that's okay, and I'll just assume people have read the report, but I'll just go through just quickly to highlight what's in the report. And I'll stop at each section for questions. So the first one's a bit of housekeeping. So governing body, we tend to have for business purposes and make sure papers are out for people to be able to read in a timely fashion. We're going to move the governing body to the 12th of January rather than the 5th of January. We tend to do that most years, so common purpose. So all members just know that 12th of January is the date for the January governing body. And we're going to move the primary care committee to accommodate that, Janet. I think you're aware of that. The second agenda item's the additional community occupational therapy resource. Again, this is something we commissioned jointly with Rotherham Council. It's been reviewed and we've come up with an additional resource to get the model right-sized with our partners. So hopefully we'll be able to implement that, which will increase occupational therapist support as part of the service. So just moving on, the next thing we've been reviewing is the suicide bereavement service. This is something we've been looking at for the last couple of years in Rotherham. It was something we had a gap with until we commissioned the Amparo service, and it's done on a regional basis with us being the lead commissioner. This proposal is to invite an invitation to quote was issued on the 8th of September with a closing date in October, and then we'll evaluate submissions of bids subject to a standstill period, and then we'll issue an NHS standard contract from November 21 with a February start date. So that'll keep the bereavement service available for Rotherham patients, we've had great feedback and it's been a great success. So hopefully that should meet the needs of our patients. I'll keep going. So teledermatology is the next. So again, this is something we've been working on in Rotherham for a while. So basically it means that patients don't have to go up to hospital for diagnostics. We can do them in GP practices and get the same outcomes. The pilot's been extremely successful, so we're moving to procure a more substantive service from the 1st of April 2022, and that's been supported by all our GP colleagues. It's a lot more efficient and also very patient-friendly in terms of access. Next one, which is the one we talked about for the conflict of interest, is the contract with Voluntary Action Rotherham. We've been contracting with Voluntary Action Rotherham for many, many years now and have a very strong relationship with them, and they've always provided an excellent service for the CCG. So we're just coming to the end of the first section of our contract, and we're due to support a proposal to extend the contract for remaining 2 years of the period from April 2022. This should hopefully give us continuity over an uncertain period and take us to 2024. This is quite a common thing we've done with the sector, and sustainability of the sector is one of our key ambitions as an organisation, as a place partnership. So hopefully this gives a lot of sustainability to the sector and allows us to work into the future with long-term plans with the voluntary sector. I'll keep going. So next is robotic process automation pilot in general practice. Sounds very scientific, doesn't it? But basically, this is a partnership with using the Digital Primary Care Fund to carry out this robotic process automation in general practice. We're working supported by Royal Free London Innovation and Intelligence Centre of Excellence, and it's going to focus on the automation of the process for the collection, return and validation of enhanced service reporting between general practice and the CCG. So this is robotic process automation of our process in terms of enhanced services. We'll be working with representatives across general practice to identify a prioritised pipeline for future automations and will progress as part of the pilot. It's a shame Dr. Cullen's not with us today, because I'm sure he could give you a lot more detailed description. But basically, it's very significant automation of primary care, hopefully to make it a lot more efficient, use our resources most effectively, and hopefully save money as well. So that's something that is exciting. As part of that, obviously, we'll try to build some research and report back at the end of the pilot. The next thing's part of our, we call it EPRR, which is Emergency Preparedness, Resilience and Response. We're a Category 2 responder in terms of this for our legal requirements. So we test our arrangements every 6 months, and just to record and give assurance to governing body that we've done our 6 months test. And we're just talking about how hopefully every 6 months we'll keep doing that until the end of the CCG in March, and work that through to make sure we're full out of hours 7-day cover to an appropriate level. So the test was on Tuesday, the 28th of September. The outcome of the test is there, and everything went to plan. There was an issue with the time it took the Rotherham Foundation Trust to answer the call on switchboard, and that's been raised with the switchboard, and that'll be picked up as part of the feedback loop. I'll just keep going. Lung health checks. So Dr. Page is our lead on this. So again, if there's any questions for Dr. Page, we'll be more than happy to take them. But it's really good news. So we've been informed that Rotherham, Barnsley and Bassett Law have been successful to be part of the lung health check programme, commencing during 2022, and hopefully it'll help us identify more people earlier with lung cancer, and hopefully get a lot better outcomes for Rotherham patients. It's already been in place in Doncaster with some great success, and we would hope that this would lead to improved health outcomes and earlier diagnosis for lung health. So that's great news. Procurement of the Rotherham safe space. So this is, we decided to procure an alternative to a crisis service, which is Rotherham Safe Space, in line with the NHS long-term plan. This is about providing non-medical peer support to those who experience emotional distress and deliver lower level psychological interventions. We'd expect the procurement exercise will commence on October the 21st, and hopefully we'll have a service in place for February. Nearly there. Care home remote monitoring and referral pilot. There's a lot happening at the moment. The CCG is leading, and its Allied Health Science Network is the acronym AHSN. It's funded pilot for remote monitoring and referral in 9 care homes across Rotherham. Hopefully this will allow care home staff to make electronic referrals directly to NHS services, and the pilot will see each of the participating homes provided with the equipment to enable staff to carry out remote observations like blood pressure, oxygen saturations and temperature. So the observation data is captured in a simple app and then can be transferred to the care home liaison team, because they can assess the client with a high quality electronic referral. Hopefully this will make our system more efficient and patients will get a better service, and it will be seamless in terms of delivery. Obviously we'll evaluate it, and if it is successful, we'll look to roll it out to more care homes in Rotherham. So communications updated, and I won't go through that, Chair, but I'll just stop there, take a breath and see if there's any questions.
Thanks very much, Chris. I know that Jeff's got a question for you.
I think it was just more 2 points of feedback. Teledermatology is well. I think it has moved to a slightly different phase. I think obvious moles and things we sort of sent through, but I'd do a referral this last week for something I thought dermatology need to be seen, and they sort of sent it back saying, we'll send it to teledermatology first and we'll look at it and work from there, which sounds as though that's like part of the next phase, which is a good thing. The robotic process of automation sound, I think, quite space age. I did try to look at that, and it was a bit vague potentially what it was, but as you said, interesting Richard being here, but it was some of the sort of admin and sort of support things. I did read some of it potentially was like filing sort of normal results and things, but definitely from an admin point of view, I think practices, staff and management have to spend a significant amount of time reporting on the work that we're doing. You know, it takes one of us receptionists sort of a day or 2 days, or 2 or 3 days a month, in terms of processing the work we're doing. So the more that can be automated, the more it releases to do other things. It's perhaps not what there's doing in terms of the data, and perhaps I think with Andy Clayton, the if you're looking at normal results, one of the things I appreciate that as far as like taking away clinical time, but actually this system wants to file a normal result, By the time you've gone on, looked at it, clicked whatever boxes, it seems to take a minute to find a normal result, which if you just looked at, say, file normal, takes like 3 seconds. But that's perhaps like more of an IT sort of issue with system one.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Also, I know that Ben wanted to comment as well.
Thanks, Chair.
Please, Ben.
Yeah, just to say, really good news around the inclusion in the lung health checks programme. Been involved in that previously in Nottingham, and it's a really good programme. But I guess it's a really good programme not just for picking up lung cancers early, but also in the way it targets long-term persistent smokers, also around getting into the prevention pathways around smoking cessation and picking up COPD, asthma and cardiac risk as well. So be really keen to make sure the connections between that work and the public health pathways are picked up as and when that goes forward.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you for that. Any final questions or comments for Chris on that section? Okay, thank you very much. Now that takes us on to the strategic update section. And item 8 on the agenda is the South Yorkshire and Bassett Law Integrated Care System update. And we've got two papers on the agenda today, the transition approach and the governance development update. So again, Chris, could I ask you just to introduce those papers, if I could hand over to you and just highlight anything you'd like to bring to the governing body's attention within that.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So the reason these are coming here is because as a CCG, obviously the Integrated Care Board, we call it Integrated Care System, Integrated Care Board, sort of interchangeable language now. So as we're moving through legislation, our assumption is that the CCG will cease to operate at the end of March, and the ICB, which stands for Integrated Care Board, will take over the functions of the CCG. So it's coming to this governing body so we can assure that we discharge our duties appropriately. So the first one is the approach to transition. Again, as a governing body, we are doing separate sessions with governing body members about the approach to transition, but we thought it was really important in public to make sure that we've got it documented what approach we are taking to transition and the latest update. This document should summarise the approach we're intending to take, which will get us to the 1st of April next year. And it goes through in some detail now about how we'll design and how we'll manage our resources and how we'll move to the new system. When we get to this section later on, it's on page 6, it again goes to phase 2, which talks about beyond 1st of April 2022 and how the design phase will continue beyond that and the key next steps and the key strategic risks which are associated with it. So we're asking the governing body to sort of approve the preferred approach to transition, which the paper documents through. I don't know how people, you should have seen, we've been through this quite a few times. I don't know what level of detail you'd like, Chair. Are people comfortable to receive it and just recognise it, or is there anything anyone would like to deep dive to in the paper?
Okay, shall I just open it up for any response to Chris's challenge there? Any thoughts on that? Jeff?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think, as you say, there's been sort of a lot of discussions, isn't there? But it's getting a bit of the time scale, which I think this sort of almost to me is the first time. It's not the first time I've seen it, but it almost sort of seems as though it's like it's sort of set out. I know members Sue Casson was saying in terms of peers that potentially sort of saying, well, actually, I think from GP's point of view, it's almost like, well, actually, 1st of April, this all changes and we've all got to be good to go for it. There's a suggestion that he's sort of saying, well, actually, don't necessarily expect massive changes for the first year of that. So it's like it's setting that process, isn't there? So I think this does sort of define it sort of a little bit more of a way. I was going to ask, I know this is in public, whether this paper could be put or part this through sort of to members as far as like those next discussions.
Yeah. Can I just respond to that, Jeff? So this is we're in public session, so this is a public paper. I mean, basically what this is trying to set out is how we set up the Integrated Care Board to be ready from the 1st of April. I think hopefully how we conduct our business, it should feel as if we have a smooth transition and there's no big, so, you know, on the 1st of April, not everything's going to stop and a new world will dawn. It'll be a smooth transition, which I think was what the designate chair was trying to express, wasn't it, that meeting? So we're going to have Sorry, Jeff, go on.
Yeah, go on.
So, but basically, if you look at page 1, sorry, it's page 2 of the document, and it's number 8 in terms of thing. It just sets out what the document's trying to do. It's not trying to redesign the future. It's talking about how we have an ICB just taking on the 4 key roles it's due to take, and just make sure it's legally formed, as opposed to the whole transformation happens for the 1st of April.
Yeah, and I think on page 3, is it 10, the higher levels of the timeline, I think sort of suggests that I think from primary care point of view, it's like who is the person in Rotherham that like is involved in that process? As you say, that sort of process goes on for sort of a period of time, doesn't it? As far as that, so I think from GP's point of view and from members' point of view, this sort of does help to set that out a little bit sort of better about it. It's not that actually everything's going to be good to go for the 1st of April. We've got to have someone in place for the 1st of April to help discuss those transitions, haven't we?
So, Chair, could I take the action with Jeff then to take this paper, particularly the approach to transition paper, isn't it? It's paper 8A. If we were to take, can we, well, Jeff, we don't need to wait for a members committee. We can circulate this to members this week, can't we? And then, so members have got it, and then we can pick it up at a future meeting, can't we?
Yeah, great. But yeah, I do think there's lots in a sense, there's lots that can sort of happen with this, and there's lots of sort of things that are sort of not nailed down, but in essence I do feel it's getting the right people in place, it's getting those meetings in place, and then sort of starting to work through those things, isn't it? And then this does set out the sort of the timescale that in reality, don't expect the 1st of April, as you say, that everything's good to go, but there's a process there that we sort of will work through and listen to people.
Yeah, I think there's a legal minimum we'll have to complete for the 1st of April 22, isn't there? But there's a recognition that 22-23 is going to be a significant year of transition.
Okay, thanks, Chris, for taking that forward in that way. Could I just comment as well? I think it's really, there's a number of practical matters that are not actually contained in these documents, and they're probably, not supposed to, but not sure really about the responsibility for financial planning and taking forward budget setting for next year, how commissioning will be developed, how the transitional process will work when there is such lateness of information, and also the process to develop places. So there's a number of things that that they're very practical in terms of how we normally work that are not contained in here, and I presume there'll be separate papers and processes established for those things.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree, Chair. So what we've got is we have a transition executive group, and the idea is there's a due diligence checklist which we'll need to complete as a system, and that's something we've set up a Rotherham CCG transition group to do that as well, which is a weekly executive meeting. So what our ambition would be to get the national due diligence checklist, make sure we absolutely deliver that, and we'll assure our audit committee and governing body that we're doing that appropriately. There's also, as part of that, we're looking to develop a risk register at system level and a dashboard at system level to assure on progress on all the key practical issues that will need to be completed. So that's going to the first meeting of that in November. So I would expect this governing body to start to receive from our next meeting risk register, a dashboard, and I'll have a discussion with the internal group about how we, in a digestible way, get the due diligence checklist as well. It's quite a lot, though. I'll have to find a way to manage it so it's digestible, though. Otherwise, we might get.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. And any other comments on the first paper, or should we move on to the second paper? Is there anything you want to add, Chris, in terms of the governance development update paper?
So the second paper, which is paper 8B in your packs, is progressing ICS governance. And the key thing is on page 1. There's just a key messages section. So I'll just go through that, Chair. It shouldn't take too long. So the South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw Health and Care Partnerships agreed to a set of arrangements to take the partnership forward. A key group will be the ICS Development Steering Group, and the membership will be drawn across all system partners and key ICS building blocks. So in terms of that steering group, currently I'm representing us on that steering group, and part of the feedback from the last item was what the steering group's been focusing on. There'll be guidance to support the establishment of the statutory ICS, which that was published in August and September. And we've got guidance coming through all the time, whether it's HR guidance, whether it's relation to remuneration, to appointment of key posts. That's all coming through now. It started coming through in August and September. ICS leaders and designate leaders are asked to proceed with preparation. So we now have a designate chair. So Piers Butler is the designate chair. He is now on the patch working in South Yorkshire. So he's now just first time yesterday started chairing this executive group we talked about. So that's good. We've got someone who has been appointed to the statutory body who can now start to make some decisions going forward. We'd expect a chief executive appointment to be announced in the next couple of weeks. And then we'd expect further executive appointments following that between now and the end of March. The engagement with appropriate partners on key components of the constitution is expected by the end of this month, so the 30th of November 2021. And actually, CCGs and me as the accountable officer do have a key role in the development of the constitution of the Integrated Care Board for South Yorkshire. So that's the key things in the report. It's just in summary, this is what we plan to do, but the real decision making really does depend on these designate appointments. So the key thing is the chair's in place, the chief executive, well, the announcement will be in a couple of weeks. It won't mean an individual's potentially fulfilling the post, but then you'd expect the statutory, you'd have a chief finance officer, you'd have a medical director, a chief nurse. And then there's a discussion currently, there's some consultation going on across South Yorkshire about what other members of an integrated care board would you have on there. So would you have a local authority representative? Would you have a primary care representative? That's a given actually in the guidance of primary care representative, but would you have then an acute representative, a mental health representative? And all those discussions are ongoing. So we'll bring them back to the governing body as they work through, but I would expect the designate chair to really push that agenda forward now.
Thank you, Chris. And so let's open that up for any comments on this particular paper. Okay, seems we're all content with that and Chris's commentary, so thank you, Chris. So that takes us on to item 9, which is the Medicines Management Q1 report. And Stuart has joined us for this item. So Stuart, I'm going to hand over to you if that's okay to introduce your paper. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll just briefly go through the highlights, key items on the paper, and then take any questions. So to start with, the good news is that we have the lowest cost growth in Yorkshire and Humber at the moment. At the time of the report, it was minus 0.73%, but we've now got data up till the end of August, and we're now below at minus 1.1%, I think it is the current cost growth. The only CCG to have a negative cost growth around prescribing, and that's mirrored by quite a low item growth, which is actually the number of items that we issue. In saying that, we issued a total of 8,974 different lines, so different prescribing lines, different items during Q1. Don't worry, I won't be going through all 8,900 of them, just a few. The graph with the yellow line on it and the black squares shows what is happening to our cost growth. The big downtrend in the last quarter is due to some of the NCSO issues that we had earlier on in the year resolving themselves, which is largely around one major antidepressant, sertraline, which is the first line antidepressant recommended by NICE, and we are a high prescriber of antidepressants in Rotherham. So going forward, the areas where we've got high cost growth are where we expect. It's regarding the DOACs, which are the alternatives to warfarin, anticoagulants, and particularly apixaban, where we've got a 12-month cost growth of around £200,000 at the moment. Again, that's in accordance with NICE guidance, and during the pandemic, we were encouraged to switch patients to DOACs away from warfarin as it reduced the number of GP appointments or clinic appointments they needed. Sertraline, which is considered as the no cheaper stock available drug shortage problem, was a high cost growth area, and the other areas are diabetes drugs, which continue to perform well in cost growth. Stuff that's decreasing is stuff that we've largely, the biggest decreases are drugs that we've moved away from, where we've switched to alternative agents, particularly around cocodamol. We've saved nearly £200,000 over the last 12 months by branding that particular drug. Quite a big variation in cost growth between practices at the moment, but it's very difficult to get accurate cost growth at the moment because of the peculiarity of the previous 12 months prescribing, which we're comparing ourselves against when we get down to practice level. Difficult year for medicines management. We've had very limited practice access. We're now getting back out to practice, and we have practice access. We are working again in practices. We've got a reduced QUIP program for the year going forward, and we're about to bring that, and hopefully we'll deliver that over the next 6 months. We're first of all going to, our first switch program, which is going to be around oral contraceptives, should go live in the next couple of weeks. We've got very limited opportunity when we compare to the other CCGs across South Yorkshire regarding switches to more cost-effective medication, which is why we're concentrating a lot of our efforts going forward on share care issues with secondary care, about non-PBR drugs, cross-charge drugs, and also about looking at redesigning the whole therapeutic pathway to, again, look at non-pharmacological interventions. I'll come on to that in a bit later on, but I'll come on to it now. So we've got 4 kind of service redesign projects on the way. So the diabetes one is well on the way at the moment. We've got 4 diabetes dietitians who are joining the community workforce as of now. They're coming into post. We have the highest prescribing cost in Yorkshire for diabetes per diabetic patient, and the highest insulin cost per diabetic patient in Yorkshire. The diabetes dietitians are looking again at rejigging the whole therapeutic pathway so that we're moving diets. Diabetes type 2 is largely a condition of diet, up into the forefront of the treatment pathways, taking advantage of the plethora of different dietary interventions that are now available nationally through NHS England, but also looking at the direct study, which shows that weight loss can bring about a greater benefit regarding diabetes management, far better than any drugs I can offer. And we're putting that at the forefront of our interventions to try and actually look at some of the issues that we have around our use of insulin and how poorly we manage diabetes when we benchmarked against other patients. Jeff, Simon and Jason, if you've got any capacity, I'm struggling to find capacity to actually have sessions for the diabetes dietitians. Nobody seems to have any spare rooms. If you've got any spare rooms that we can have to offer these, which are going to be PCN-wide clinics in your practices, please let me know. Otherwise, David at the Stag will get all this resource because they have got capacity there. We've got quite an interesting project going on around care homes. It started off as a hydration project, which was looking at work that happened in East Berkshire, showing that if we actually get patients to drink, remain fully hydrated, we reduce the admissions, we reduce the number of falls, and we reduce the number of UTIs that happen. That's morphed a little bit now. We've got a task and finish group up and running. We've got a training package that we're working together with comms to put together, which should be ready in a month or so. We're also working the ambulance service, and we've identified, using ambulance data, the 4 care homes that are having the highest rate of admissions into TRFT and the highest rate of ambulance call-outs. So the idea is to put the hydration training into those homes, but to work intensively over the next few months with 4 homes. That's a heavy user of the ambulance service, have high admissions rates, and hydration training, continence training, wound care training, medicines management training, looking at electronic ordering of medicines in those care homes, with the aim to see that we can actually reduce the number of admissions and reduce the call outs to the ambulance service. We're also looking at a couple of medicines management metrics around antibiotic prescribing in the care homes that we want to work with, and laxative usage. We've also got the second highest prescribing of antidepressants in Yorkshire, and we have been for over a decade. We've got a project launched this year reviewing patients who are antidepressants. It's patient-led. We identify patients through the searches, whereby we feel that we can identify patients who don't know why they're on an antidepressant. We offer them an opportunity to work with a member of the medicines management team about withdrawing and stopping their antidepressant if they so wish. Again, negating some long-term issues that we have with antidepressants. I forgot to mention with diabetes as well that we have a fantastic range in between practices in the management of diabetes and performance regarding HbA1c. We're also hoping to do more work about chronic pain. The prescribing of long-term high-dose opioids is a major area of concern, where again we benchmark. What is the word I should use? We use a lot of high-dose opioids. The recent NICE guidelines is again saying that these drugs have very little benefits or usage in long-term pain management. So we're looking at trying to get some alternative pathways in place which will not rely on pharmacological intervention for management of pain. And we're also participating in the CROP audit, which again benchmarks practices prescribing of high-dose opioids, and that is being shared with practices as we speak. So that's all I propose to say, and I'll take any questions. I've got hands. Sorry, I was looking at the graphs and the data. I've got hands up already. I don't know who was first.
Yeah. Thank you, Stuart. Yeah, we have got a number of people who want to comment on that, Stuart. So I'm going to start with Ryan, if that's okay.
I think you're on mute, Ryan. I think.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yeah.
Yeah,
We can
okay.
hear now, thanks.
So I just wanted to ask about your cost reductions in dulaglutide. I mean, how is that affected? Because it says it's changed over to an alternative drug.
It's an alternative preparation, so we're still using dulaglutide. The Trulicity, it's just an alternative preparation that we're using there. So
is it biosimilars, or are they? Because I'm not aware of anything which is cheaper that's around. So I was just interested to know how that happened. And one other thing I just wanted to point out, particularly in the context of SGLT2 inhibitor usage, because empagliflozin is coming up quite high. You probably are aware of the new CKD guidance and also the heart failure guidance with regards to SGLT2 inhibitors. So there's potentially something that you will see quite a substantial growth in, because it's not a diabetic exclusive indication any longer. But yeah, I mean, I was just interested to see, to know, how did you affect cost savings with regards to swapping over to an alternative to dulaglutide?
So empagliflozin is our flozin and SGLT2 inhibitor of choice, and so we it's probably the of that class of drugs. It's the drug that we use the most of by far. We don't use so much of the others, and we're rejigging the diabetes guidelines as we speak to reflect the focus on weight loss and the dietitians coming into post. And certainly the outcome data, looking at the SGLT2s regarding sort of heart failure and cardiovascular outcomes, seems to be far stronger than it is for the gliptins. So the guidelines at the moment were pretty much metformin and then going on to gliptin, and we're going to sort of rejig that, sort of probably make the flozins the second line choice, and move them up the guidelines. So I'm fairly comfortable with our use of that drug. With the dulaglutide, I've come back to that. I think it's a preparation that's changed, or not the actual drug. So we're still using it. It's still our GLP-1 of choice. It's just that it's just reflected in that we're using a different preparation than the one that's on that list. So whereas it's changed to a different formulation of dulaglutide, I believe I'll come back to you on what's gone up and what's gone down, but we haven't moved away from dulaglutide. We haven't switched patients to alternative GLP-1s.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. So Stuart will provide some further information to Ryan on that basis. If that's
I'll go
okay.
through those 8,974 lines, and I'll show you what's gone up and what's gone down regarding the GLP-1s. But we're not restricting them at all.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. I'm going to go Jason next, and then Jeff, if that's okay.
Thanks, Chair. Stuart, I asked you this question yesterday in Aqua, so it won't surprise you, but I thought it was important to have this in public. So when I saw that Rotherham was the only area that had got negative cost growth, that my question to myself was whether primary care locally is prescribing everything we should be prescribing. You know, are there things that actually the people of Rotherham aren't being prescribed that they ought to be, or is this just spectacular management and organisation by yourself and your team?
It's obviously the latter, yeah. So it's a really that's a worthwhile question asking, Jason. And what I can say is that certainly around cardiovascular drugs, the DOACs, we are very healthily in prescribing those, and we're following national trend, if not just slightly above it. So we are using those, and we are also got strong cost growth. Our highest cost growth is in diabetes. So again, the new agents that have come around in diabetes, GLP-1s, the flozins and the gliptins, we're using plenty of those. In fact, I think we've got the highest gliptin use in Yorkshire, which is one of the reasons why we're looking at the whole diabetes pathway, because we've invested heavily in the diabetes drugs and we're not getting any better outcomes from them when we benchmark around HbA1c control, which is why we invest in the dietetic approach. And again, probably not a great area, but we also got very strong cost growth on the higher opioids as well, which we probably don't want to have to some degree, because the NICE guidance is increasingly saying that they play lesser role in the management of chronic pain, which is why we want to look at that. The areas where we are doing well is a classic example is we were bath emollients and shower gels. The evidence for them is marginally that they're probably not effective at all. So looking at across South Yorkshire and Basset Law, it's a small area, but £150,000 a year is spent on those drugs. The expenditure in Rotherham is less than £5,000 on those drugs. So we've implemented that guidelines and we're not prescribing them. And if you look at the drugs not to routinely prescribe graphs, I get data on that. I've got a whole plethora of graphs there. We benchmark really well on all the stuff that we're told is of limited clinical effectiveness not to prescribe. But we're doing really well on that. And also waste management. You know, we saved £60,000 already this year in quarter one on care home waste management. And we're not even working with every care home yet because we can't get into every care home. We're rejigging the care home team so that will happen. And you know, we stopped third-party ordering a while back. One of my colleagues asked me how we managed to reduce our emollient expenditure to such a degree without getting death threats from patients. And stopping third-party ordering was one of the areas we did that. When we put the onus back on the patient to order it, they only ordered what they needed. So when I look at all the data, you know, if anybody wants to sit down with me for an afternoon and go through loads of graphs, I can talk forever on them. I'm very comfortable with how we benchmark and how it looks.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. So move on to Jeff, if that's okay, please, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks. Just a couple of points. The plan, I think, is fair, Stuart. It's like reasonable and something to work at. I do feel for PCNs of the last couple of years with sort of the pharmacy support that we've sort of took on in terms of additional roles puts us in a different position to actually focus on those things. The dietitian thing, yeah, I think there's a couple of things sort of just moving on. We did discuss in our PCN sort of last month about additional roles for next year, which potentially could have sort of a part-time dietitian that might be able to go into nursing homes and to support that. In essence, should some of that come from sort of what staff are already there. Wickersley did say that there was this offer as far as like so many dietitian appointments anyway, and often say, well, why would we then use additional roles funding if there's actually sort of funding already? But again, the PCN thing, I think within PCNs, there can be that issue in terms of space, as you say, so with certain sort of practices, and that's probably a newer thing that we need to look at with PCNs. And definitely some of the longer term things that you look at, you're saying diabetes and weight loss. Some of the other stuff we move on to in terms of ICS, as far as the inequalities, a lot of the inequalities can relate to weight, obesity, hip problems, whatever else as far as that. And that then comes down to sort of actually sort of change. It's okay to recognise those things, but actually to change those things is putting things like dietitian into place, isn't it? But yeah, from a specific point from our network, I've had message Pat that I think that Mulberry Health Centre has got a couple of spare rooms in one of the practices that may well be available. So certainly in our practice, we're going to struggle for space, but actually if there's a satellite dietitian sort of couple of clinics available at the health centre, then I'm sure that's something we could look at in terms of accommodating it. So we're better off using that than additional roles, but it's having, as I say, we're all having to, it's the newer thing sort of to us to sort of think a bit laterally about sort of where those appointments are provided, but in a sense, if you say the staff are there, that's part of trying to make, still we're improving those inequalities, diabetes and all the bits and pieces as far as that but it's just trying to coordinate that. But I have messaged Pat as far as sort of saying, is that something we can pick up?
Excellent. And around diabetes, we've also been successful. I've got a grant from NHS England so that the dietitians are going to have point of care testing. So we're getting them all a little gizmo, which will monitor HbA1c, so we can make it all one stop. So patients don't have to have blood before they go to the dietitian. They can have it all done there. The machine will also do cholesterol and creatinine clearance as well. So we should be able to do the whole diabetic review with one machine, but small steps. We're not going to introduce cholesterol and creatinine until we've got the HbA1c and that. So we're going to point of care testing first, and then hopefully expand the role of the dietitians and the range of tests that we can do.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeff. Ryan, I think, did you want to comment on a question again?
Yeah, sorry. It's just a small point, because obviously, you've mentioned quite a few times that diabetes costs are increasing, and you're not achieving the desired outcome. And I have a slight conflict because of my other job as an endocrinologist. And I think one of the things that you would be looking at, particularly in the context of improving outcomes, is to seeing whether the drugs are being used effectively, because a lot of the time we see people who are amassing many additional drugs and they are not effective, and they just keep on prescribing a new one without stopping the ones that are ineffective. And I don't know whether any work has been done, particularly in the context of community pharmacies or even somebody at the practice or when people go to pick up their prescriptions or having their diabetes review with regards to stopping ineffective therapies, because you might find that there is a huge amount of wastage, particularly in the context of patients not adhering to medication because they're experiencing side effects, or if they're ineffective and they're finding that they're just getting the medication and it's not working for them.
I totally agree. It's a very difficult area to actually get control of it. Without actually raiding patients' homes, we don't know what they're not taking. One of the areas we are doing though is because when we look at our data compared to other CCGs, we use far more insulin per diabetic patient than anywhere else. And so at the moment we've got one of the team running a whole plethora of quite complicated searches, and we're trying to identify patients who, first of all, we're trying to identify what dose of insulin they're on, because in most records we don't know what dose. We're trying to identify patients who are on what don't appear to be very logical regimes. And we're also trying to identify patients who are on very high doses of insulin, because the work that the dietitians have done so far shows that they can actually, through weight loss and better management, they can reduce insulin doses quite substantially, which is better for the patient, and actually improve that HbA1c diabetes control. So we're targeting our over-insulinized, overweight patients to start with, because that's one of our areas of biggest inequity. Because when we look at the data we have from practices, when we start to get down to type 2s on insulin, then the variation in performance of practices in managing diabetes is huge. It's marked, and we really want to address that. So that's the first priority of the dietitians clinics going forward.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. Amy, is that something that we should ask you to do a little bit more work on, in response to Ryan's challenge there? You've outlined some of the things you're doing. Personally, I'm not sure if that covered everything that Ryan was asking, and just it might be that we just ask you to take that one away and do a little bit more on that one. Thank you. Just one final question, and then we'll have to move on, I think. But so, Simon, can I just move to you, please?
Mine was just more of a general comment about, as we found with weight loss being such an important part of diabetes control, but it's a huge part of general health. And I just wonder, in the new ICB, ICS world, we should be looking at as a priority, because it has been a bit diluted across the patch a bit, with the council and being responsible for parts of it, primary care doing bits of it, secondary care doing others, whether we should have a more coherent whole for this, because it is such an important part of improving health for the area. It's just sort of to highlight that as an important priority, I think.
I think Simon, you hit the nail on the head there. There's so much. There's so many different initiatives around weight loss at the moment. I think everyone's generally confused, and this is one of the diabetes. It's only around diabetes, I must admit, but one of the simple pathways work, and so the pathway will basically be if you've got a diabetic and you think they're going to benefit from weight loss, then don't bother about the low-calorie diet and the digital weight program and the various initiatives. Just refer them to dietitians and they'll sort all that out. They've got the access to the various schemes and they'll be able to refer the patient straight in. And there is a practice payment for referring to some of these schemes, and the dietetic pathway will make sure that you still get that remuneration as well.
I mean, certainly as at the PCN level, we're looking at that as, but it's sort of bigger than that, isn't it? And it's how we get that sort of forum going with public health, with the council, with care, and that sort of with primary care to really sort of start nailing this. Because I mean, it would have an issue, have an effect on. We're worried about opiate prescribing. Well, that's often given to people who are overweight, who've got joint problems, and if you get their weight down, then they'll need less of those as well. So it sort of ripples out if you can sort of improve obesity.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I think there's some matters there for Stuart to take forward from both Ryan and Simon. Ben, did you want to comment as well? Sorry.
Yeah, just coming on Simon's point around the pathways and how we connect those up. So one of the pieces of work that I want to push forward through the Prevention and Health Inequalities group that's now set up as part of the Rotherham Together partnership structures is really to look at all of those preventative pathways, what they're aiming to present, because obviously you do weight management stuff for many, many different things, and diabetes prevention is one of them, but other areas as well, and how we get consistent routes for referral or recommendation, because not everyone needs a service, and people just need the support and the push. So that is a piece of work that my team are looking to pick up and push through that group. So it'd be really, really good to work with PCNs on that as well, because I think it connects to social prescribing and lots of the other initiatives that are going on as well.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Okay then, so the next item on the agenda is also for Stuart.
I'll leave it. Jason, sorry, I can't get hold of my chat messages. They won't come up. But did I see a chat message come up saying that you've got capacity at Thorpe-Esley and maybe at Rawmarsh?
No, I sent you an email, but yes. But
oh, send me an email, right? Sorry.
I'm in the same PCN as David, unfortunately, though. But anyway,
okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right, I'll leave you now. Thank you all.
Thank you. Okay then, so we need to move on to the prescribing incentive scheme, the next item. So Stuart's here for that.
No, I'll stay. Sorry. The prescribing incentive scheme. Sorry. That was basically.
Is that okay, Stuart? We're expecting to do this one as well. The governing the paper is the prescribing incentive scheme, and it's asking the governing body to continue to know that we're continuing to fund the prescribing incentive scheme. Is there anything you want to highlight for us in there?
Not really. We have got the and it wasn't an appendix to the Q1 report, but we have got a prescribing incentive scheme. It is up and running as described in that paper, and at the moment, performance against the prescribing incentive scheme is very good, even though we're only into 6 months into it. So we practices are achieving the criteria that are outlined in the scheme.
Okay, then I'll just open it up to see if anybody wants to comment on this. It's been through all our committee structures already, and so as a governing body, we're asked to note the continuation of the scheme and of the funding of the scheme. But is there anybody want to comment on that? Or are we happy to note that? Okay, so we take the recommendation there that we note the continuing funding of the prescribing incentive scheme. Okay, thank you, Stuart.
Okay, now I will leave you then. Okay, right.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Right, item 11 on the agenda is the finance and contracting performance report for the year to date, and so I'll hand over to Wendy to introduce this item, if that's okay, please, Wendy.
Thanks, Chair. So continuing on the good news, on the Stuart's good news front, so we're looking at month 6 financial report today, and it's the conclusion of the half-1 planning period. And the good news is that we have delivered the required financial plan. So just stepping back and into the detail, cash and payments in sections 2 and 3, we continue to achieve 100% compliance against the standards, which continue to be stressed by the national team. And in terms of that operational performance, we did balance overall. I think at month 4, you'll probably remember that I was slightly nervous about the sustained pressure in mental health and LD placements, and also we were seeing that in CHC, the hospital discharge programme. And in fact, mental health and LD, we did continue to see some further growth, but it was mitigated by the performance on prescribing, which equally continued to track at below the growth levels that we first thought. So we did have a slight net gain into the position at month 6, which is excellent news, because whilst I know we're going to discuss the 7 to 12 financial plan next, but it has been confirmed that the actual performance in the first half of the year will carry forward into the second half of the year. So within that position, we were able to return some contingency and reserves back into the pot, and we can now carry that benefit forward. So it's an entirely good news position. And I'll just pause there at that point. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Wendy. Any questions for Wendy? Okay, then, so Wendy, equally important, if not more important, is the second half of the financial year. So you've got the H2 plan as item 11B. So would you like to just talk us through that plan and the process that you've been through for that?
Thanks, John. I certainly will. Sorry, just 2 seconds while I get these papers lined up. I apologise. Just don't want to be talking to the wrong sections and causing confusion. So maybe I can start at the end with a brief summary of what this all means in the end. So when we have gone through the process of constructing this plan for months 7 to 12, so the second 6 months, half 2, actually what it revealed was a planning gap, so a financial gap of just short of 5 million, so 4.9 something million. But we believe that we can identify ways of closing that gap, albeit in year, predominantly using non-recurrent means. But on that basis, the governing body are being asked to approve the CCG setting a balanced plan for the second half. So I hope I put sufficient detail in the paper itself to give you transparency on the makeup of that plan. But there are 3 substantial chunks to it. There's how we receive our allocations, how we model our spend, and then our plans for closing that gap that it does leave. So if I just try to focus in summary, and then I'm really happy to take any questions at the end, but it's just pitching this right for everyone in the room, isn't it? So in terms of allocations and how we receive our allocations, these are set out in section 3 of the report. But I think essentially for members to note is that how the half 2 financial regime is operating is built on the half 1 regime. And so because of this, the vast majority of the allocations that we see and the way that they flow into this system are familiar to us. And we can track from half 1 into half 2. And I suppose also that whilst these allocations have been uplifted for example, growth and inflation in terms of the effective pay awards that have since been granted, they've also been reduced for levels of COVID support coming into the system, and for increased efficiency requirements. The net result of all of this is shown in that very top table, and the white boxes, where you can see an ICS level allocation of 1.5 billion, and in the blue boxes to the right hand side, a CCG allocation of 259 coming through the CCG, being our share of that 1.5 billion. So then if I move us on to expenditure, so we start with 259 million of allocations, but that's the number, if you could just hold that in your heads for a few minutes, because in terms of expenditure then, we've modelled that in the way that you're all familiar with. We haven't changed our methodology. So we've gone back to our core model of what were we saying at forecast outturn? So what have we actually spent? And then we'll just extrapolate that forward by 1 month to say what would we spend at month 6. And starting from that outturn, we then take out what we know to be non-recurrent items. So we start with our view of essentially what would be recurrent spend, which we then inflate as appropriate for inflation, that we are told what that will be. So we apply that through the model, and we then apply assumptions about levels of growth, which can either be national growth or it can be things that are specific to Rotherham. And when that all plays through, we end up suggesting that we need to commit £264 million of the spend during that planning period. And that's how we get to, there's a starting gap of 5 million. The good news currently is that within those expenditure predictions, there's £2.5 million worth of spend, which whilst we wish to track that as being recurrent, it's because it is recurrent. To the best of our knowledge, that is currently, that will be recurrent. The terms of the financial regime in operation mean that we don't actually have to pay that out in this year. So there's an example to do with stroke patients with NHS England, but another example would be charge exempt overseas visitors. Ordinarily, we would pay something for those patients, but under this financial regime, those transactions, those smaller transactions between organisations aren't happening. So we need to assume that we, at some point in time, we will need to pay that, but in this half of the year, we don't need to. And that gives us a total of £2.5 million of the benefits for items like that. So including that one, but like that. So this leaves us a residual gap of circa 2.5 million, which is what is then shown at section 7 in table D. And this is the suggestion about the recommendation to governing body about how we could approach closing that gap. There's one item on there that's just over 400,000 for prescribing, and that relates to the schemes that Stuart was describing to you just now. So the things that the meds management team have identified that they can do recurrently, they can achieve that in this half. But we don't have any other schemes on the table like that, and therefore the suggestion is to mitigate the other circa 2 million using non-recurrent measures, which include the things on that table. They include playing in our planning assumption of holding a contingency. And we're just saying, as there is nothing committed against that just now, let's commit that against the gap. Equally, let's do a trawl of our income and expenditure situation. We will be doing this anyway as we close down the CCG. And we know there are things in there. We've had latest information, for example, on an HMRC ruling, which we know there are some items in there which we can transact to close that gap. And we're really quite confident that there is sufficient, if you take those propositions as a basket of propositions, we're absolutely confident at this stage that that will sufficiently close our gap. As we keep, so we talked about this at Aqua yesterday and just internally, just before I joined this meeting, and there is the asterisk and the caveat small print on that, because I can give you assurance that in our financial plan, the levels of growth that we've built in are realistic and prudent for things like prescribing growth, CHC, but this is all based on what we've seen today and to the best of our knowledge. I cannot unfortunately guarantee that the exceptional thing won't happen. If it were to happen and it was beyond any offsets that we have elsewhere in our financial position, it would be a case of needing to flag that early to the ICS and just flag that as a system pressure, Rotherham, we think we're going off a little bit. I don't anticipate that happening, but it is just, I just do need to say it because I don't want this to make it sound like this is definite and it's all the answers. It's a balanced, it's a risk-based approach to closing that gap. I think at that stage, I'll pause there and just open up to any questions if that's okay, Chair. Just
thank you, Wendy. So yeah, let's open it up for any questions or comments on that plan. I'd probably just like to comment as well, based on the discussion that we had at Audit Committee yesterday. I mean, we recognised the need to balance and the need to submit a balanced plan. We just talked a little bit about recurrent versus non-recurrent, and we recognised that the non-recurrent solutions equate to about 1% of our total allocation, so that felt, reasonable. We heard from our external auditor who was at the meeting that the plan that Wendy was proposing didn't cause any concerns from his point of view in terms of the likely audit of the accounts at the end of the year. And we really recognise that, the pressures that we're facing in terms of COVID, recovery, demand, overall workload meant that it would be almost impossible to deliver further efficiency savings in the last few months of the financial year. And so therefore a more recurrent balance position would not particularly be achievable. So for all those reasons, Audit Committee sort of supported the plan and would recommend it to the governing body today. So we're asked, at the end of Wendy's report, we're asked to know the content of the report with a view to supporting the suggested mitigations and approving the submission of a balanced plan on the basis set out in the report. So I think we're presumably all content to support those recommendations. Okay.
Thanks, Chair. John, sorry, could I just raise there is the matter of the submission timeline as well with this. I don't anticipate any changes at all currently, but should minor changes be required, could I ask that governing body consider delegating that, as we've done in previous years, to a subgroup? It's because we won't be meeting in full governing body in line with the submission request. So we've got a further deadline on the 11th and then the 16th of November. As I say, I don't anticipate any changes, but it's just to have it in place in case there are.
Okay, then. So I think that sounds the only practical solution. And so if members of the governing body are content with that, we'd report back any changes that we'd made. But as Wendy says, hopefully there won't be any.
We just record, Chair. Could that subgroup be perhaps the audit chair, the accountable officer, and the chief finance officer? And just record that. Would that be okay?
Yeah, I think that silence means agreement. I think so. Yes, thank you, Chris. We'll do that. We'll do that.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's move on to item 11C, which is the delivery dashboard. And can I hand over to you, Ian, to introduce this report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Afternoon, everybody. So just to remind colleagues, the delivery dashboard, we report by exception in terms of performance. Most of this reporting period is through the August with some elements of September. What I just set for context, as I've done in previous governing bodies throughout the pandemic, Chair, is just a position in terms of the kind of pressure on the system, and through this reporting period and ongoing, the Rotherham Place remains under significant operational pressure across all parts of the system: primary care, mental health, both our acute and community elements of provision, and across into our aspects of social care. our COVID prevalence in the community remains high, with some of the highest prevalence in the region. And we've also, during this reporting period from when we last met as a governing body, started to see the COVID inpatient levels rise from what were around 40 patients the last time we met to about 61 as of now. So you can see that the pressure is in the system. In the context of, therefore, the delivery dashboard, it looks pretty similar to what members have received in previous months throughout the summer period, where we've had that ongoing pressure. I think what I would say by exception is that, and I just highlight to you on page 1 there, significant work that's been undertaken, and I know we're going to discuss this in a bit more detail in confidential, around the elective plan. So link back to Wendy's comment around half-1 delivery. Rotherham as a place and the hospital in the main has been quite successful over the kind of summer period and into earlier areas of autumn in managing to kind of continue planned care wherever possible within the context of the pandemic. You can see there our performance is positive relatively to other areas, 3rd out of 106 nationally for elective care, so that is positive. Our A&E performance and attendance, you can see within the narrative there on the graphs, is that our A&E numbers have started to stabilise again back to what we think may be the right levels historically. However, we are seeing complexity and challenges on flow through the hospital setting and increases in number of ambulances attending our A&E and other A&Es across the system, which is continuing to kind of challenge colleagues through our urgent and emergency care centre. The diagnostic waits is a challenge for us, is a challenge nationally. Continued work around trying to recover diagnostics, but that is one area around the 6-week wait target that we'll have to keep the focus on going through winter and into next year. Our cancer targets, you can see from the report, our 2-week wait for cancer is positive comparatively. 2-week wait for breast is also positive comparatively. But we are still challenged on the 62-day treatment targets, as we've discussed it at length in previous meetings. I think just finally, I'd just comment around the mental health aspect of the performance. So our performance is holding, although slightly on the downturn there, but I'm confident that we can hold that performance above the national trajectory in that space, backed up by our ISO digital provision as well as our local RDASH IAP service. So again, Chair, I think this will be a challenge to hold this performance over the winter, given the context that we've got with regards to current pressures in the system, and it is a risk that a number of those elements of performance could deteriorate further over the winter. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. I'll open that up now for any questions or comments for Ian on that report. Jeff again, please.
Thanks, yeah. Yeah, I agree. And in terms of mental health and sort of winter pressures, I do think that in this sort of background, there's some stuff going on in terms of the 50-50 additional roles being put into place with RDASH and PCNs. And I think a number of the PCNs have also, with the Innovation Fund, looking at taking on mental health services. So it might be like a stopgap issue there, but I think over the next, there are potentially sort of more services being put in sort of outside of sort of what's set up at the moment that sort of helps to support that.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. It slightly broke up at my end. I don't know if it did for others, just as you were talking there. But I think a couple of things. In addition to the performance, we have our kind of winter surge plan. There's quite a lot of initiatives that we're turning on throughout the winter period to try to support that. There's a specific one around mental health capacity in terms of what we can do in there. And we're on continued active dialogue, which seems like daily at the moment, to try to do new and innovative things to support that demand from a mental health perspective. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And if there's no other questions, we'll move on to the quality and patient engagement section of the agenda. We start with item 12, which is the patient safety and quality assurance report. And I'll hand over to Sue to introduce that paper, please, Sue.
Thank you, Chair. Just going through the report contains the usual information at the beginning about infection prevention and control, and you can see the work going on to review all incidents and outbreaks and the work to support COVID vaccination across the patch. I think that other than mentioning that at the beginning, the thing I was going to pick out mostly was down on page, I'm just looking for it myself, starting on page 12 with a very much summarised version of the recent inspection programme throughout the year, resulting in the last inspection, CQC inspection of the Foundation Trust. Just to provide a layer of assurance in terms of how much work the CCG are involved in, together with NHS England, reviewing progress against agreed actions and where progress is to plan and where there might be any delays in there. We're also working with NHS England in terms of reviewing the enhanced surveillance that we have in place to support the Trust in achieving all their actions. And part of that work has also involved me forging links with the team of senior nurses at the Trust and attending their meetings. And I'm also going to do a walkthrough of A&E, the Urgent and Emergency Care Centre, sometime before Christmas, trying to just match up diaries at the moment. And that goes through onto page 14, and the rest of the report I'll take as read, and I'll take any questions if that's okay.
Thank you, Sue. Questions or comments for Sue, please? Okay, thank you very much. So we were just discussing at Aqua yesterday whether there's any role for Aqua in terms of reviewing the overall position on that Rotherham Hospital CQC report, and whether there's anything you need us to focus on or follow up. So we'll probably pick that up at our next meeting, if that's okay.
I think it's important that any work that we do and any updates go through Aqua. The timing sometimes is an issue, as you know, because reports come to governing body every month, and Aqua is every other month. So in terms of if there is an area that governing body members, we've had this discussion before, haven't we, John, want a more detailed report, I would suggest that Aqua would be the place that the more detailed report goes through, and that you as chair of Aqua would then bring the assurance or not to governing body. Is that okay?
Yes, that's good. Thanks, Sue. So we'll catch up on that one. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Do you want me to move on to the patient and public engagement report? Oh, I can't see anybody, so I don't know if anyone's got their hands up.
No, I don't think there's any further questions, Sue. So yes, let's move on to item 13 then. Thank you.
Thank you. As you'll see, that these reports do remain quite short, but that's the challenge of trying to find different ways of getting engagement activity underway across the patch during a pandemic. But as usual, Helen includes information about what we're hearing. There's the Mind, Body and Soul report, which will be available from Health Watch. There's a little summary of what that report was intended to address and some of the findings that are coming out. We'll bring that in full through both the Aqua for information. It will definitely come to governing body as soon as we've got the full report available, and an update on the friends and family test. One of the discussions I had at the last meeting with TRFT senior nurses was with a nurse who is leading on the friends and family test about their processes at the moment, and how we as a CCG did used to be much more involved in that, with the result that those contacts with patient and public engagement manager will be reaffirmed, and more input in terms of they not just the ticky boxy part of the friends and family, but the stuff that will make a difference, and moving towards, they're very keen to move back towards the you said we did type things on each ward area and each clinical unit. So Helen will be supporting some of that work going forwards. And again, just summarising some of the work that's been undertaken across the patch with regard to both primary and secondary care. Towards the end of the report, although Helen is no longer leading on the volunteer in part of the COVID vaccination programme, she, together with others, has been rounding this off, passing it on. Practices are working together to provide this support. But she has, as you can see there, there's a little summary of the number of sessions, over 5,000 volunteer sessions and over 25,000 volunteer hours across the patch, and still going, still counting. And some of the comments that have been received from volunteers down at the end there, which I think is great, there for people to have a look at. There were many more. It's quite difficult just picking some of them out to give a flavour. And the last Health Watch newsletter is that the appendix there is embedded within the report.
Okay, thanks, Sue.
Debbie, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I don't think so, Sue. Just to reiterate what you said about the Health Watch Mind, Body and Soul, that's really just in a questionnaire that was undertaken. We've had a lot of responses all about what Rotherham patients are actually feeling. So it's very much, although there's a national survey out there at the moment coming through, it's very much a Rotherham one. And I know all our partners are going to be able to do a lot of learning from that. So, but no, I think you summarised everything else well, really. And we've got a PPG network meeting. We postponed October's because we didn't want to just bring people together if there wasn't really anything to share with them. So we've that's now at the end of this month. I think it's about the 19th of this month. So that's coming up.
I think that's a really good point that you make there, Debbie, about this being about what Rotherham people are feeling, thinking, and how they are Rotherham people are trying to deal with things mid-pandemic.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Debbie. Thanks, Sue. Jeff, you have a comment to make, I think.
Yeah, just I think personal reflections in terms of friends and family. It's positive that we're starting to request that again. I think we sort of said quality contractor primary care, the sort of figures were about 18 months out of date until recently. So yes, it's important in terms of asking those things, albeit I think there's sort of a bit there sort of political, everyone's been stirred up to say that GPs are doing a rubbish job. We've just in our last sort of friends and family, not blowing his own trumpet, had 60 responses. I know Sue sort of said it's sort of relevant, it's not 5, and for the first time ever had 100% recommending the practice, which is great. But then the flip side of that, not that that's necessarily a place to take your information from, but Maltby Facebook page this week, someone asking which GP to go to in which of the best GPs in Maltby. About 18 comments, six of which were all the GPs are rubbish and they're all not worth bothering with. And I'm sure none of those patients have registered in all 4 practices in the last 18 months in terms of actually sort of saying that's actually a fair reflection. I think it's just sort of a GP beating in terms of whatever else. But then, yeah, specific to our practice, there was, one of the patients sort of had put, moved from Blythe Road surgery. The GPs are great, but it's ridiculous having to wait outside in the rain. To say again, we look at sort of quality, we look at sort of providing sort of things as far as the patients and CQC assessments, but actually in sort of society that sort of in terms of if that's the real reason that sort of people sort of decide to sort of move GPs, and because you're actually providing a good service, is because of the fact that the doors are closed and we don't have we're not a big health centre that's got a foyer area that people can wait outside in the rain when they can ring up as far as that. So I accept those things, isn't it? People's frustrations, but in my head, I wouldn't have ever thought sort of any other patient who moved however long ago who had a scooter, and because she had to cross the main road on a scooter, she then moved to Manor Field surgery, which doesn't bother me, but I just feel they're not the things that I thought people would have changed GPs for. If you sort of assume it's because you sort of not support them and sort of discussing things with them, but that's that's not necessarily what people are sort of judging their feet by, as far as where they or the complaints by.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for that perspective. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions for Sue on this report? Okay. In that case, we're ready to move on to the corporate business section. Item 14 is the corporate assurance report for Q2. Ruth, is there anything you'd like to highlight from that report, please?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to start off by being clear, because I do have 2 assurance reports in circulation at the moment. So this is the assurance report for the CCG business, not the transition. So there is a separate report that went to Aqua yesterday and is in circulation around the assurance around the transition to the CCG. But this one is most definitely about CCG business. I am hoping that I can keep them separate going forward, although we did have a big debate in the team about some areas, whether they should be in this report or in the transition report. So I do apologise if going forward you see the other report and there are some things that do overlap slightly. So the report that you've got, as you can see on page 2, we've added a risk around the close down of the CCG and transition into the risk register, which is really positive. We've managed to submit the KO 41 return for Q2. And if you remember, these were suspended during COVID. So we've just started picking those back up again. The number of FOI requests seems to have stabilised. We did have quite a leap in those at one point, and we have received 1 subject access request in this period, which is unusual for us, but we do have 1. I think that's all I wanted to pull out, Chair. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay then, any questions for Ruth on that report? Well, we're asked as a governing body to note the activity during the quarter. I mean, I think we should note that there were no risks highlighted in that quarter. And one thing that's quite helpful is the fact that we actually didn't lose any staff in the 3 months of that report. You know, when one of the risks, I think, of the transition from CCG to ICS is the loss of staff, but we haven't lost any staff during that period. Okay. So next item, we've got 2 items at 15 and 16 on equality. So Ruth, can I hand over to you to take those 2 reports together and take us through those reports, please?
Thank you, Chair. So as in previous years, the EDS2 is here for assurance and agreement as part of the governance process. It has been to the Equality and Diversity Group and had a thorough review with the commissioning senior management team, also amending certain sections in there. It then went through operational executive, who were content with the outcome. The Equality and Diversity annual report also needs signing off before being published on the website, replacing those that are already on there, and that needs to be done by the end of January 2022. So both these documents were approved by Aqua yesterday and are here for ratification prior to publication. Debbie, do you want to say anything further?
Well, just to say that we go through this with a fine-tooth comb, looking for, it's a self-assessment process, looking for where we feel we've got the evidence first before we make our self-assessed judgments. And it's pleasing to know that, you know, of the 18 areas they ask us to consider, we've certainly got 14 where we believe that we are excelling and 4 more where we are achieving. So a positive submission, really. And it just, if it's accepted, it's not statutory, but it's deemed to be good practice. And if the governing body accept it, then we can put it onto our website, which we've done in the last few years, and it'll be there for everybody to see.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Ruth. Thanks, Debbie. So we're asked to approve the Equality and Diversity Annual Report to be published by 31st of January, but we'll be able to publish that earlier. And we're asked to support the Equality Delivery System submission as well. And I mean, I think there was, as Debbie says, there was some very good evidence in terms of our high compliance with those requirements. Yeah. Okay, so we're happy to endorse those and approve those 2 documents. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Item 17 is the joint section 117 aftercare policy, and this is an item for Ian to introduce, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so this policy came through CCG governance, went to audit committee yesterday, Although the CCG is obviously in its demise and will cease to exist at the end of March next year, this policy is very much kind of still fit for purpose for the Rotherham place, and I endorse the approval of it today. The policy itself documents the approach that the CCG and the council will undertake in terms of setting a framework for working with regards to aftercare for people that come under Section 117. It cross-cuts children and young people, learning disability and neurodevelopmental pathways, and in the main just sets a clear framework for how we'll come to decisions to fund care in the system, and gives a real robust approach in terms of managing Section 117 aftercare. The policy itself has been in development for a good period of time, has had full engagement from all partners, including Ardash, who obviously provide a lot of our learning disability services across the Northern Place, so had input from partners. So just endorse the policy today, Chair, and as I said yesterday, we got quite a lot of detail in audit committee also yesterday. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. So can I just check if there's any questions or comments for Ian on that paper? Sue?
Just to say that we do have, I know Gary is a joint lead. We have a 117 lead within the CCG who has been fully engaged with the process.
Okay, thank you, Sue. So as a governing body, we're asked to approve the policy and also approve the creation of the panel, which must have a CCG officer on it to ensure quality. So I presume that everybody will be content with that. Thank you. Moving on, item 18 is the control of substances hazardous to health risk assessment review, and I'm going back to Ruth for this item, please, Ruth.
Thank you. So something we have to do under legislation every year is complete cost assessments. As you say, control of substances hazardous to health, and then review them annually. We can't get away from that. It's something we have to do. So here's this year's offering. They're here for ratification, having been approved by ACWA back in September. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, questions for Ruth? Okay, then we'll accept that report then. Thank you, Ruth. And that moves on to 19, which is the organisational risk assessment.
Thank you, Chair. So yet again, another document that we have to review annually. We made some changes last year due to COVID, so hence this year hasn't changed much. I'm happy to take questions on that. Again, the risk assessment is here for ratification, having been approved by ACWA in September.
I think this is an area where we've seen very good practice in place for a number of years now in terms of the reporting that Ruth's done to the ACWA committee over that period of time. So we were content with that risk assessment in that context, really. So we'll receive that. We'll receive the risk assessment. Thank you. Item 20 is the minutes of the Remuneration Committee, and this is an item that's also for approval by the governing body. Remuneration Committee make recommendations to the governing body. This is obviously an item that fits into the conflicts of interest heading, bearing in mind that the paper makes recommendations on the pay of governing body members, and the Remuneration Committee made sure that they followed good practice in managing conflicts of interest when they discussed this paper. So I'll just hand on to Janet really to just introduce the minutes and explain the recommendations, if that's okay, Janet.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The Remuneration Committee met on the 20th of October. And as John said, all the members had a conflict of interest at some point. So we managed that during the process by handing over the chair and for the appropriate people not to take part in the when we got to the decision-making process. The paper outlines presents 4 options that the members were to consider in relation to very senior managers' pay. And in going through the paper, there was an opportunity for members to ask questions and seek clarification. It was also noted that in terms of the other CCGs for the South Yorkshire area, they were recommending option D. And we checked out things that whether the options were affordable and within the financial budgets, and we're assured that that was the case. So the recommendations we had to do this in stages. So for all of the different stages, so that was for the very senior managers, lay members and GPs and clinical executive all agreed to recommend option D, and the papers here for ratification by the governing body. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Janet on those minutes? Are we happy to ratify the recommendations of Remuneration Committee, bearing in mind that conflict of interest matters were covered within the Remuneration Committee?
Sorry, I couldn't get my hand up. Can I ask a question?
Yes, sure.
Yes. So, yeah.
How do we deal with the conflict of interest here?
Well, I think we have to rely on the work of the Remuneration Committee. So as conflicts of interest were properly managed at Remuneration Committee and the recommendations comply with conflict of interest regulations, then we can make the decision here as a governing body.
Okay, I just didn't know in terms of you're asking the membership to, if we agree with ratifying it, whether the fact that, use myself as an example, I have a conflict of interest in ratifying it.
Because that conflict of interest was dealt with at Remuneration Committee, in that in your case, Sue, no chief officers were involved in the recommendation on the pay award for chief officers. So we dealt with it there. I mean, we could repeat the Remuneration Committee process here, but I think we've decided previously that, bearing in mind the compliance with conflicts of interest at the Remuneration Committee, we make the decision here as a governing body.
I just wanted to be absolutely clear that that's what we were doing. Thank you.
I can ask if everybody is content with what I'm proposing there in terms of managing the conflict of interest, but I think that's the way in which we've developed since we were in a position where previously a Remuneration Committee used to make the decision, but to improve governance, we moved to a situation where Remuneration Committee made recommendations. So we're in that complexity, but I think I think we've been content that this was a fair way of doing it. So in that context, we're asked to endorse the recommendation to the Remuneration Committee, and I think that I can see a number of ticks. So I think we've got approval to that. So thank you. We'll approve that recommendation from Remuneration Committee. Janet, that moves us to item 21, which is the Primary Care Committee meeting from the 14th of July. Can I just ask if there's anything you'd like to bring to the attention of the governing body from that meeting?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think these are the minutes from the 14th of July, so some time has passed from them. They're here for information. The only two items that I would update are the two approvals that we made, which was about updating and approving the Primary Care Committee Digital IT Work Plan. And we also had an update on the Innovation Fund and the approval of the 21-22 process. We did also agree that the meetings would take place bi-monthly from July onwards. And I think that's one of the reasons that we're a bit out of sync with the timing of everything. But I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Janet. Any questions for Janet? Okay, then we'll receive those minutes. Thank you. And the next set of minutes are the engagement and communication subgroup from the 17th of September. And again, I'll just ask Debbie if there's anything you'd like to bring to our attention from those minutes.
Nothing in particular, John, but I would just like to mention we did receive a very comprehensive paper from the commissioning group that explained all the service changes that have been made throughout the COVID pandemic and the engagement that was undertaken for each one of those activities. And we also took an update really regarding the re-enablement pathway that was initiated just as we went into lockdown as to how that had gone and the efficiencies that have been made and the improved quality for that pathway for Rotherham patients. I'm just sorry, one other thing is that we were talking about the vaccination and the anxiety campaign or anti-anxiety campaign that's going on. And I'm just pleased to mention really that VAR have agreed that for all our vaccination volunteers, they will receive Community Achievement Awards, which I think is a really nice way to mark the amazing support that those volunteers have given to the vaccination programme in Rotherham.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Any questions for Debbie on those minutes? That's good, thank you. So we'll receive those minutes. Item 23 is the minutes of the A&E Delivery Board from August and September. Again, I'll just ask Ian if there's anything you'd like to bring to our attention from those minutes.
Thanks, Chair. Nothing specific out of the minutes. You can just see the kind of dialogue that's it just kind of demonstrates the pressure in the system actually from those minutes, Chair, and also the work that we've been doing over the kind of summer and period around preparing for further surge in the system and the winter. Happy to take any comments or questions on those. I know there's other members of the governing body that also sit in that forum as well, so happy to take any comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Ian. Any comments for Ian? Okay, thank you. So we'll receive those two sets of minutes. And then, Ian, we've also got the place board minutes from the meetings in July and September. So I'll just again ask if you've got anything you'd like to bring to our attention from those minutes.
Again, nothing specific that's not there to be read, Chair. I think you can see again in the as we've been working again through those time periods, trying to keep the place priorities live within the system while trying to manage transition in the system as well as managing system pressure. So hopefully the minutes just reflect what colleagues have heard previously. But again, happy to take any comments or questions on those minutes.
Thank you, Ian. Any comments or questions? Okay, we'll receive those as well. The next minutes are the Audit and Quality Assurance Committee from the 6th of July, and I've no items to bring to your attention from those minutes, so hopefully you will receive those minutes too. But again, if there's any questions, I shall take them. Okay, we'll receive those. Item 26 is the ICS Health Executive Group minutes from August and September. Chris, can I just do the same as the other?
Yeah, so they're just here for openness and transparency, Chair, but if anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Questions for Chris? We'll receive those as well then, thank you. And then item 27 is a GP Members Committee from July and September. So again, Jeff, can I just hand over to you for anything you'd like to bring to the attention of the governing body from those meetings?
Yeah, I think again, as you say, there's sort of from a month or two ago, mainly sort of discussions on COVID and ICS transition. But if there's anyone wants to specifically ask, it's fine.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Jeff? Once again, then we'll receive those minutes too. And that brings us on to the information section. Item 28 is just really future agenda items, and if there's anything arising from today that we want on agenda in the future, chance to raise that now. Item 29 is the glossary, and that's there at enclosure 29. Item 30 is any other urgent business. I have none, but I'll just ask if anybody else has got anything they want to raise under this item. Item 32 is risks raised, and whether there are anything that we've discussed today that adds to our risk or needs considering in the GBAF risk register context. I mean, I must say that audit committee yesterday, we had the head of internal audit opinion stage 1 report, and we were getting some good feedback from from internal audit about our risk management and governance arrangements this year, and they were sort of feeding back that the GBAF arrangements this year were as they'd expect, and that they thought there were some good review and challenge of our GBAF at both AQUA and governing body in September, so that was quite helpful. Item 34 is the exclusion of the public, and so we now ask that representatives of the press and other members of the public be excluded from the remainder of this meeting due to the confidential nature of the business to be transacted, publicity on which will be prejudicial to the public interest. So that means that I'm going to conclude this meeting. You'll see that the date and time of the next meeting, as highlighted by Chris earlier, will be at 1 p.m. on the 12th of January 2022. So thank you very much, and we'll continue with the confidential agenda at 3 o'clock, if that's okay, as per the agenda timescale. So we'll meet again at 3 o'clock on the Teams link. Okay, thank you everybody.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, Chair.